Hello, everyone. Happy New Year and welcome back to Awkward Insurance. I am Dustin Bryant, and on this episode, we have a conversation with Nikki Wyatt recorded back in October of last year. Nikki is so much fun, and we had a blast sharing awkward Uber stories and talking all about transportation network coverages. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for joining me on this podcast. I want to introduce to you today the most fabulous claims person you will ever meet, Miss Nikki Wyatt. She is a Penn National Claims Service Office team leader and has been with Penn Nat for 25 years, which is pretty daggum amazing considering most people don't have a one employer history. And she's been a CIC with the National Alliance since 2018 and teaching with the National Alliance since this year, which has been probably a really fun process to learn how to teach with everything that is going on in our environment right now. Nikki, thank you so much for joining me today.
Good morning. I'm so glad to be here with you, Dustin. I'm looking forward to this conversation with you.
Oh, I am too. I am so excited. We are talking today about transportation network coverage, which is always a fun conversation to have on the agent side of things with your clients. It's been an evolutionary process from when they first started to where we are now, which is in a much more comfortable place, if you'll ask me. But that's what we're going to talk about today. And I can't wait to hear your side of the story, being in claims, because claims are just always so much fun. But I want to give you a little moment to just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, like you said, I've been handling claims for Penn National since 1995. This is my 25th year. I've just turned 50 this year, so this was my big year of 2020 was turning 50 and 25 years with Penn National. But
Woohoo!
I know. I have two wonderful children. They are the last one just finished college, so I'm free with that. Thank goodness. I live in North Carolina is where I'm from, and just love what I do with claims. Claims you have to either love it or hate it. There's really not an in between when you get into that service. I absolutely have such a passion for it and love what I do. It's never a boring day. Like you said, claims are fun. They can be draining, but there's always a good story to take home if you need to. So,
There's just so much involved with claims because you not only get to, I kind of envy you a little bit, you not only get to handle the fun, nerdy insurance piece of it, but then you also get to connect with the client and fix everything that's gone wrong. And that is always something that I look forward to as an agent is when a client called me and had a problem and I got to fix it and all was right with the world again. It's just the best feeling in the world to be able to fix somebody's problem.
it absolutely is, and that's what your passion has to be, especially in claims. And I tell my adjusters all the time is that you could have 100 people that you talk to today, and they're all yelling at you, they're unhappy with you. Something has gone wrong in their life, or you're not giving them the information that they want or want to hear. But then you have that one person who calls in, and you're able to actually be empowered enough or have the ability to move them forward, whether in their claim or help them somewhere in their life. And that for me is like giving me that little crumb of the cake. I don't need the whole cake. I just need the little crumb to get me going to the next day. So if you can find your passion in that, that's exactly what you need to have, especially if you're going to be in a claims environment or any service environment, I would think, especially these days. As we all know, 2020 has been a little crazy. So not only have we been a little more on edge as individuals and claims people and employees, so how are the people that we're dealing with every day? So there's been a lot of adjustment that have to go into that as well.
Now, we are both from the South. I'm in Arkansas and you're in North Carolina. Do you live in North Carolina or do you cross borders anywhere?
No, no, no. There's that's why they have borders around North Carolina.
So we're both from the South. Is it the same for you as it is for me? My favorite were just the sweetest older clients that I had, that they're always so appreciative and they've got the
Mhm.
honeys and the sweeties. And, once you fix their problem, like we were saying, you're like a god to them. You've just made everything better. And so they were always my favorite.
I agree. I agree. My staff will always laugh at me because they know when I'm speaking to someone that may be elder, I'm trying to help, and I'm almost feeling like I'm helping my grandparents get through a situation. And I think I turn on my southern accent a little more,
Oh, you
And,
bet you.
yeah, you're a little more Southern. You're just, yes, ma'am, no, sir. Those kind of things are going on. And then I'll just get off the phone and I'll go, I think I'm in love with an 80-year-old man or, something like that.
Yeah, that's
They
so
are, they're
true.
so appreciative. They're so appreciative and so sweet of everything. And I have found with the older clients too, and I'm sure you understand this, is that they get at first they can get a little more frustrated because they feel like they're not understanding, which there's just a little more of a frustration that you'll feel from them. So if you just take the time and help them through the process, because as we know, the processes have changed it over the years so much, even from when I started. And technology is so crazy. When you're speaking to those people and go, "Hey, what's your email address?" And they're like, "I don't use email. I don't text. I don't have a cell phone." You're like, "Okay, well, I will send you a letter and we'll put a stamp on it. And we're going to mail it right to you."
Right. I love that you said that your Southern accent probably comes out more. I do a lot to hide my Southern accent as
Mm.
much as I can. But you're so right. When you get on the phone with your elderly clients, man, it comes out so thick.
Yeah.
And you
I
bring
had
in the darlings and the oh, thank yous and the yes ma'ams and the no ma'ams. Just, it's over the top. I love it. I kind of miss it a little bit.
Yeah, I know. I do too. I remember a gentleman who, bless his heart, he had a total loss vehicle, and he called me. He's from Alabama, from Birmingham, Alabama. So he calls and he's got the thickest Southern accent, and just you can just tell he's just always been a good old boy kind of guy. And I said, "Where do you live?" And he said, "I live in Birmingham." And I said, "You live in Birmingham, Alabama?" And then he said, "Yes, ma'am, I do." And I said, "Well, let me pull up that address and tell you where to go." And he just thought that was the greatest thing in the world. But you just have to. He was just the sweetest man. So I pretty much think I talked him all the way into the DMV and getting all that title work done. But they're fun. They're fun people.
All right. So, as much as we love our elderly clients, they're not the ones that are driving around in these transportation network vehicles. So,
Mm.
to kind of get the conversation started, I want to talk about our first experiences with Transportation Network. I know I was not on board with it at first. It was very unusual to get into a car with a stranger. This is never going to take off. How crazy is this? We have taxi cabs and vehicles, but we're from the South where we've also got garages and driveways and everything. And people in big cities, they don't have that. And parking spaces are like a piece of real estate all on their own. So,
Mhm.
hindsight 2020, I see how it kind of evolved in the bigger cities first. What is your first experience in a ride share?
Okay. When I first started learning about Uber and so forth, my daughter had just gone off to college. She was down at Coastal Carolina in South Carolina, and it's her freshman year. And she just kept saying, "We're just getting Ubers. We're getting Ubers." And I'm like, "What is an Uber? Like, I don't even know what you're talking about." And this is like, I think this was 2014. It would have been her freshman year. So 2014. And she would send me these videos of them in the Uber. And Dustin, there's like 7 girls in a 4-person car. And
Oh
I'm
my
like,
gosh.
yeah, and let's be honest, they're freshmen in college. They're not they're probably not the soberest thing in the world either. You know what I mean? So they're they're having a great time. They're sitting on each other's laps. They're in this stranger's car, first of all, which, when you send your daughter off to college, this is not what you want her to be doing.
I'm
And
getting anxiety listening to this story.
yeah, yeah. So they're all in there. They're singing. They're carrying on. The music is loud. I'm thinking about this poor driver. First of all, this having has 7 girls in his car sitting on laps and so forth. But that was kind of when I first realized there was something out there like Uber. And then my very first experience with them was probably, and maybe about a year later, I was in Nashville with my soon to be husband now, and my brother and my sister in law. So we were staying at the hotel. Of course, we just Uber downtown. If you guys have ever been to Nashville, I'm sure you have. You're having a good time when you're going to Nashville. So we
Right.
Uber down, and all we're thinking about is the excitement of getting downtown. I'm not thinking about being in Uber. I'm not thinking about insurance, any of that. So we go and we spend the day in downtown Nashville, have a great time. It's time for us to go back. We've probably been down there 6 or 7 hours. So I've had a couple beers, that kind of thing. And we get back into the car with the Uber. Well, then my brain starts working. I don't know why after a few beers, my brain is going to work more than, when I don't have that.
Everybody
So
believes that though, right?
that's right. So I get in this car and I start talking to the driver. And I'm like, oh, and I always talk to my drivers. Of course, my husband is always like, stop talking to people, quit asking them questions because I just love finding out about people. So I'm like, how long have you been driving for Uber? And then it just hits me and I'm like, what's this person doing about insurance? So I asked him, I said, do you have your own insurance? And he said, yeah, I've got my, insurance on the car. And I said, your personal auto policy? And he said, yeah. I said, so you own this car, right? And he said, right. And I said, well, you
Okay,
don't have
stop for
any
just
other.
a second. You're doing this, you're risk managing and advising on how many beers at this point?
Yeah. Do I have to say how many beers I had? Let's just say we were down there for like 6 or 7 hours. You do the calculation.
Okay, well, my husband's a police officer, and usually when he asks somebody, how many drinks have you had? It's one, but what they don't say is it's like a 64-ounce one.
Yeah. We had pretty much hit every bar and down in Lower Broadway. So I'm just gonna just say that.
All right, so you're asking, he's saying something about his personal auto policy, and all these, I could just see it already because all the red flags are going off, especially if this
Right,
is so many years ago.
right. And I said, well, what would happen if you got in a wreck? And he goes, oh, well, my personal auto policy, would just cover everything. Well, I know better than that. And
Did you ask
so
him where he
I
got
just
that information from? Because, somebody's policy is going to cover him if his agency said that.
right, exactly. Well, no, I didn't. I didn't take it any further because by that time, everybody else in the car is kind of eyeballing me. Like, could you just be quiet for 2 seconds?
Oh, yeah. Come on,
Yeah.
Nikki.
So, but in my head, I'm like, this is a nightmare. This is an absolute nightmare. And I got to get back to work on Monday. And this is the first thing I need to be addressing with my team because I just kept thinking if we got into a wreck and he's at fault and some of us are injured and so forth, we're not going to have coverage for this. And,
Right.
but will the adjuster know because this was still so new in our environment, will the adjuster know to even ask that question, to even
Right.
ask, hey, I mean, who's to say, yeah, I had three people in my car. You're not going to ask, are you driving for a TNC, or those words weren't even really around back
All
then.
right. That wasn't even relevant then. Like, who even knew what a
Right.
TNC was? I mean, that's all in the
Yeah.
policy now. Like, it specifically says this is what a TNC is, and had
Yeah.
to be rightfully so because everybody's like, so go ahead and give me the boundaries of what a TNC is.
Right. That's exactly right. And so in my head, I'm like, God, have we handled claims here in the past, like in the past 6 months or the year where we paid for things and they were actually driving, for hire? And I mean, my brain is just going. So that was kind of my first experience of me realizing, oh my gosh, have we responded as the insurance world and insurance professionals to what's going on in the world. Of course, I always worry about, the company I work for. Are we there? Have we put the proper things into line to make sure that we are handling this? The one thing you'll find if you work for claims departments is that you sometimes are invited last to the party. So usually product management, underwriting, those departments are already working on things of where the world is changing, and they are either trying to quickly get caught up with it or they're ahead of the game. So that was my question when I went back to work, is like with underwriting, it's like, hey, what are we doing to take care of this? And then of course, talking to product management, are we aware of this exposure that now could be out there for some of our insureds, so on and so forth. And they were kind of on top of that. But I was like, just in my head, Dustin, in my head the entire time. And I'm the same way now when I get into an Uber, even though I know that a lot of that gap has been closed, supposedly,
Right.
um, then I'm still in my head just thinking constantly as to, because I see the world, almost like a risk management. Everywhere I look, there's a liability that could
Um,
happen. So
right.
hyperly aware of all of that. So I'm constantly like just analyzing. And I'm asking people all kinds of questions. I still do it when I get into an Uber. When I came to Austin a few weeks ago, I was riding an Uber and I'm still asking the guy about his insurance policy. And they probably think, shut up, lady. Like, I don't have to tell you all of our information, which they normally don't. They'll just say, I'm properly insured. I'm like, okay.
Probably, you know what? That's a really common answer. I'm probably insured. And you're like, but are you sure you're insured?
Yeah, are you sure? If you have your policy with you, I'll look it over real quick. Just so I know I'm safe, not to give you advice, just so I know I'm safe.
Oh my gosh. So transportation networks, I think everybody is really familiar with the brand names. Uber is, I think, the number one transportation network, followed by Lyft. And then there's some more that are up and coming. There's Via, and then there's Curve. So most consumers are going to be most familiar with the Uber and the Lyft. And I'm a very visual person, and anything that's really pretty, I'm attracted to it. So I'm
Mhm.
attracted to the Lyft model because of their really pretty purple sign.
Right,
And I
right.
love seeing their little pill sign in the dashboard that just lights up all kinds of pretty. And so then there's also one called Via, which is it's unique, but it kind of piques my risk manager, and I know it will yours. So the Via is a unique one that actually encourages drivers to continue accepting fares into their car along their route. Can you say distraction much?
Uh,
So they're incentivized with higher commission rates if they pick up more riders along the way. So, me as a consumer, if I'm thinking about that, number one, I want to get to where I'm going as quickly as possible. Can we please not stop every 5 feet and pick up a new fare? But also, I'm a little bit of an introvert. I don't want somebody sitting next to me,
right, right. And
especially not
especially in
this
today's
year.
world. Right,
Right.
especially in today's world. Yeah, don't touch me. Get away from me. Yeah.
Right. And then there's Curb, which is actually working to bring legitimate yellow cab type drivers back into the situation, which they're probably going to be the safest as far as insurance goes because they've got their commercial driver's license endorsements, and they're also going to be backed by their whatever their company's policies are as well. So they're going to be able
Mhm.
to use the platforms the same way that all of these other personal platforms are using it. This is really funny. My personal experience, very first, I was really resistant to it. I'm not getting in a car with a stranger. This makes no sense, especially not in Arkansas. We've got our own cars. I'm never going to have to use one of these. Again, never say
Mhm.
never. We ended up
Right.
in Florida, Disney World with our kids. We had actually just adopted our first child, and she was maybe 6 at the time that we went to Disney. And Disney had just started using, have you heard of the minivan? Are you up and up
No.
on your Disney language?
Does it
Okay, so
come?
they use Lyft, but they designed so they go through the platform of Lyft, but
Okay.
the cars that they use, of course, it's Disney, so everything has to be Disney themed. Is a van that's painted with red and white polka dots to look like Minnie Mouse, and then of course they pipe in Disney music. So
Sure.
you use the app. Well, I had no idea how to use the app to begin with. I had never been in a ride share. So I think we're about to, it's 25 bucks a pop. And you're like, okay, fine. We're in Disney. We're already spending bukus of money. We're going to stay in Disney. The kids aren't going to know any different. It's just a Disney van, right?
Mhm.
I didn't know how to use the app. And we end up in a legitimate Lyft, like non-themed Disney Lyft comes to pick us up. And we're suddenly stuck here with our kids. And the one that we had just adopted, of course, she had experienced some stuff and she's very familiar with strangers. So now we're starting to teach her stranger danger. And here we are getting into a car with strangers.
Right.
We're like,
Right.
so we
Yeah,
get
yeah, yeah.
in. Right. And you get your driver's name, and yeah, I'm coming up with something really quick on the spot. And we get in, and I'm like, hey, Mike, it's been so long since I've seen you kids. Mike and I have known each other since college. And this guy is looking at me in his rearview mirror, like, I'm sorry, what's happening? Like he's lived in Florida and he's gonna go ahead and take us over to the Magic Kingdom. Everybody say hi, Mike.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah,
so he
exactly.
picked up on it real quick though, because I put in a plug. I'm like, kids, we don't get into cars with strangers, but Mike is not a stranger. He agreed to come and pick us up today. So
He's He's my best friend.
Well, then it's time to go home. And I'm like, oh crap, I don't think we're gonna get Mike again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it was like the third ride that week
Oh
where
my
my
gosh.
older daughter was like, Mom, you don't know these people, do you? Like, shh. But after that experience, it was great. We didn't ever get back into the minivan. The lift was so much cheaper than the 25 bucks a pop. But then I got so
Mm,
much more familiar with it that anytime I traveled, I'm like, I'm calling a lift because this is real
yeah.
cool.
Yeah, and I don't know if Lyft is the same way, and you may know this, but I know when they first started, they were like a for women drivers. They were
I
employing
didn't even
women
know
only.
that.
I don't think they're still doing that, but at first that's what the company was made for, was for women. And I think the platform of that initially was women feeling safe,
You know
um
what? Maybe that's why I love the purple bubble so much because it was
yeah.
branded towards a female. That's a really interesting. Oh, that's really cool. I like
Yeah,
that.
and I doubt very seriously that they're still that way because I'm sure the money is now it's more of a thing for them, so they'll let anybody drive for them. But I think that's how they initially started out was to support women. First of all, to support women professionally, and then second of all, so other women would feel comfortable riding with the women that they hired, kind of thing.
Now I
Yeah,
feel a little upset that I was tricked into their branding. Don't you? Do you ever feel upset when you're like, oh my gosh, that red color got me? Like that's
exactly.
marketing
Exactly.
101 and I fell for it.
Exactly. Well, it's like buying a bad bottle of wine that you bought just because the label was so cute.
Right? Well, that
Yeah,
would make me really upset.
yeah.
Oh my gosh. So, my first experience with a transportation network as an agent is a very odd little man
Mhm.
that was in our agency. And he was always doing weird stuff like this, which at the time, this is maybe, what are we? We're 2020 now. This was maybe 5, 6 years ago when this stuff
Wow.
started up. So the first transportation network was in 2009 and it started with Uber. And they actually first branded themselves as Uber Cab, which makes sense because I don't think a lot of people were going to get into a car if they didn't have the association of being in a cab. So as an agent, this little guy calls and we're starting to hear about the transportation network stuff. And it's kind of one of those things where you just don't talk about it. You avoid it because there's no coverage and there's no endorsements for it. And if you tell a personal lines client that you are probably going to have to get a commercial lines auto policy, then you're dashing their hopes and dreams of this extra income, right? Because
Right.
commercial lines policies aren't cheap.
Right.
So this odd little guy calls in and he's like, "Well, yeah, I'm getting a new car. I need to know how much it costs." And so we go through that, and he's like, "Well, I'm gonna be driving for Uber." And then it's one of the very first one that happens as an agent,
Right.
and you're not prepared for it, and you're like, "Oh, yeah, so I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure there's not coverage on your policy for that. I'm gonna have to get back with you and consult with my commercial department and see what we can do." And then you go through we went through Progressive because I mean he wasn't a commercial account. And so it's not
Mhm.
like you can go to the big commercial companies. They're not going to write something really small like that. And it's a really hefty premium. Well, then of course you hear it. You hear the sadness and what do you mean I have to pay that much? I'm not even going to get paid that much. So that was my first experience as an agent. I can only imagine you had told your story already about how you first started realizing you 3 beers deep that you're getting into this Lyft or Uber or whichever it was, and you're suddenly going, where's the coverage? I need to go back to my company and talk to my team about this. So that
Right.
has evolved over the years, thankfully. When coverage wasn't there on the personal lines auto policy, these transportation network companies stepping up a little bit and providing some coverage. But then there was the hot button item that could be litigated about where coverage started and stopped. And so then I'm sure you're very familiar with this because you are, again, the most awesome claims person anyone will ever meet. There's three stages that go along with this. There's the stage of when you're on your app, and I'm so happy that you brought up, the questions that your adjusters need to be asking. There's the three stages. There's when you're on your app waiting
Mhm.
to accept a fare. That's stage one. Then stage two is a fare that you've accepted, and now you're driving and going to pick that person up. And then there's stage three, the customers in the car. So the the transportation network companies bought their commercial lines policies and said, you know what, there is a gap in coverage. You don't have coverage under liability, physical damage, med pay for livery or conveyance. And for those listeners that don't know, livery has nothing to do with a body organ. It has everything to do with delivery of persons or service for a fee. When I was a brand new agent, I'm like, what is a livery? Since when are we into the butcher business on the personal auto policy? No, it's delivery of persons are good for a fee. It's your yellow cab, livery or conveyance. And so there are exclusions in the personal auto policy for that. So the transportation network said, we're going to provide you with coverage for stages 2 and stages 3. When you accept your fare, you are now on our clock. And when you have somebody in your car, obviously you're on our clock because you've got somebody in your car for you. So then that's when insurance companies started coming up with, thankfully, they didn't just flat out reject everything. If it were me, I'd remain obstinate and just be like, I ain't covering it. But they didn't do that. They looked out for the interest of the consumer, which is really nice of them. And they started adding coverage, first exclusions, then coverage that you could purchase because nothing comes without a price tag that you can purchase for stage 1. So, which is being on the app. You've got your personal auto policy while you're on the app. This part confuses me though, because you're right. Your adjusters have to be asking the right questions. And I'm not a transportation network driver at all, but I know what
Mhm.
my habits are on my phone. And if I were a transportation network driver, I could see me sitting in my car, maybe on my way to work. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to open up my app real quick and see if anybody's waiting. I don't even know
Mhm.
if I want to pick anybody up, but all of a sudden I've got a coverage issue if I don't have TNC endorsements on my policy. So let's talk about that. As you know, I flip through apps habitually. How do insurance companies know? How do your adjusters know? Or what questions do you ask on an average like claim? There's nobody in the car yet. You were just, how do you even know that somebody's on their app?
Well, that's a great question, Dustin. That is absolutely a great question. And this is something I really try to hone in because a lot of my adjusters, just to give you a little background on this too, a lot of my adjusters, I bring in a lot of trainees. So this may be their first job they've ever had, definitely their first insurance job they've ever had, first claims job they've ever had. So trying to drill into them early into their career that you need to ask, did you have passengers in your car? And then the next question, if that is a yes or whatever, you need to ask the question, do you drive for a TNC, a company of that sort? However, let me just say to you, it's still a new thing. It's still a very new thing in our industry. It's not something automatic. Even a seasoned adjuster may not think to ask that. So
Right. Well, I mean, how
somehow or
can you
another,
even
you're
prove it?
hoping.
I guess you could call the company and be like, "Hey, were they logged in?" But like I said, what if they were just flipping through apps, or what if they left their
Right.
app open in the background on their phone?
Yeah, and that, I mean, and that's the thing, and that's the challenge that I think claims professionals are having is number one, we're all creatures of habits, and so I've been doing this for so long that I know that if I'm going into an investigative process of a claim, I've pretty much am asking the same questions that I was taught day one. I mean, you're going to listen to people with their answers, and you're obviously going to dig deeper, and you get deeper, and as time goes on, you learn the extra questions to ask. But when you're trying to take some, especially seasoned adjusters, and add in, hey, we got one more question, one more level may need you to ask, that can be very easily forgotten. And that's just human nature. That has nothing to do with people's talents, their intelligence, how good they are, how bad they are as adjusters, has nothing to do with that. That is just human nature, knowing what your next question is going to be when you're doing an investigation. So
Right.
really trying to just keep it on the forefront with my employees, like, hey, let's talk about this. And that's why I kind of, created some, when I started creating classes and PowerPoints and stuff like that for my team, just so that you just have to talk about it. And I think Uber and Lyft and, we can talk about the Door Dashes and the Uber Eats, because those are a little bit different in nature as well. But those are so much into our life now So trying to pull
Right,
what we do on our
especially right now when everything's
right,
shut down and, a lot of even restaurants, I guess it's kind of like the evolution of the consumer being afraid to use the transportation networks. Restaurants weren't really on board with these delivery services at all. Like
right,
you might walk up to a restaurant and see a little sign here and you're thinking, why isn't everybody in this area delivering in some way or another, especially when it's so easy to just
yes.
contract with one. And now COVID hit and all of a sudden everybody is shut down and now it's a very viable option to keep their business open. So it's very
Right.
prevalent today.
Yeah, most definitely. So trying to move your real life situations into that professional Q&A that we have to do on claims. And again, I just try to keep it in their mind, keep it in their forefront. And if they're talking to me about a certain claim that they're bringing to me, I will ask them the question. I try to push back and go, well, look, this sound, were they driving for Uber? And if you don't ask the question, people aren't going to tell. Like you were telling your story about the gentleman coming into your office and letting you know he was going to drive for a TNC. Imagine how many insureds don't do that or don't
Right.
think to do that. Number
Right.
one, they don't want to have to buy the extra endorsement, even though it's not that expensive. I don't believe. Now, I don't sell these endorsements, but I think when I researched it, it wasn't that expensive. But they don't want the extra expense, and a lot of time your insureds don't want you to know what they're doing. Um,
Right. Well,
right, and
that's why I
so
was asking, how do you know when somebody's logged into their app? Because from the agent side, we've got to ask a whole lot of qualifying questions right up front. And there's a fine line that we walk as customer service agents and producing agents about how many questions you can get an insured to answer
right. Oh
before they're
yeah,
like, I don't want coverage with you if you're going to be this nosy,
yeah,
you know?
right,
And that's
right.
one of them. Like, what is your profession? A lot of them, to be honest with you, a lot of the questions, if there are consumers out here listening to this, a lot of the questions that your agents ask you are not always because they're trying to restrict your coverage. Sometimes it's because they're trying to get you discounts. So go ahead and answer the question. Where do you work?
Exactly.
How high of an education do you have? All of that stuff comes back to some discounts. But then there's these that we need to make sure. You said that consumers don't always know to ask the questions, well, or to know to tell the information. You don't know to tell what you don't know to tell. So it's the same with
Exactly.
questions. You don't know what questions to ask if you don't know what questions to ask. So that's
Right.
the agent's responsibility, especially if one is being a good insurance advisor and not just a salesperson, an insurance
Yes.
salesperson, to be able to get those most important questions out there, especially with this being such. And if you're in a big city, then it needs to be like one of the number one questions that you ask. In Arkansas, and not so much.
Right.
We just don't have a
Right.
lot around it. I get on the app every once in a while. I ain't going anywhere, but I get on the app just to see how many cars there are around me because I'm curious as to how big this industry is in Arkansas. It's just not.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in
It's
Nashville
not.
and Dallas and Disney World, it's huge. So you need to ask those questions on the front end.
Yeah, and I would think too, and I say this too. And imagine the nightmare, and you'll understand this because I can only imagine what this would be. But imagine the nightmare. Not only do you need to be asking it for your new policies, but I would think for renewals on your personal
Yep.
auto policies, you need to follow up with that. And again, I can't imagine how many renewals an agent will have come through their office every year, especially your bigger agencies for a personal auto policy. But people's lives change, as you know. So when a renewal comes up, do you take the time with every renewal and ask, hey, the ones that make sense, are you driving, for any kind of TNC companies? Are you engaged in that business? Because more and more people are doing it. And the most professional people that you wouldn't think would drive for Uber or Lyft, are out there doing that because they can make their own schedule and do their own thing. And especially this year with so many people, losing their jobs, that's an easy pickup right there is to start driving for a TNC.
It absolutely is. As far as the agency goes, I know in the agency that I worked in, and I absolutely adore and still, consider myself a teammate there, even though I'm not there anymore. We had some really good standard operating procedures as far as renewals go. When you've got big books of business, you can't reach out to every client, every renewal. And you definitely want to follow a good rule of 80/20 rule for making sure that you connect with your most profitable clients but you also still have an obligation and a duty to make sure that every single one of your insureds knows that there are risks out there that we need to be aware of. So we had a questionnaire that would go out to our clients, whether it was email or mail for those that didn't have the email, that would ask, have there been any updates? Do you want to talk about this coverage or that coverage? But as you were talking, I'm sitting here thinking, I don't, in all of my years of sending that form out, I don't think it was ever updated to
Hmm.
include transportation network to say, have you started driving for Uber or Lyft or anything like that? And
Hmm.
that would be a great question to add
Right.
onto that type of questionnaire. Claims is probably one of the most ambiguous zones for a CSR or even a producer. If you have good operating procedures in an agency, it is best practice for a customer service agent or a producing agent to send that claim call directly over to claims when it's received. Sometimes we take the claims a little bit personally because they're our clients. And yes, we want to hold their hands and we want to be there for them, but that is a slippery, twisty black hole towards an E&O. If you're on the phone with a client and you start talking about what coverage you may or may not have, especially
Mhm.
right at the time of a claim, because there's a lot of emotions charged there. You want to make it right for the insured as quick as possible. You want to give them a little bit of assurance before the claims adjuster calls them after turning and let them know that everything's going to be okay. And if you do that, you might fall into the hole of saying you're going to have coverage, and well, then you will have coverage because that E&O policy will step in for you. So I want to ask you again, it's best practice for a CSR or producing agent to say, got your back. I'm going to turn this claim in for you, and then let those licensed claim adjusters handle that. Are there any, now we know that there's the endorsements that are out there, but if you have the endorsement and you've obviously got the coverage from the transportation network company, are there any gaps that are left at this moment? Or is there something that insurance advisors can go, you've got the coverage, but I still need you to know this little piece right here is missing for you? Is there anything like that out there still?
Well, the endorsements do a great job of really closing that gap from what I've seen. Now, I will say that my company, we do not offer that endorsement. So we right now at this point, we have decided we're not going to do that, and that's in the states I handle. I don't know what the northern states do or not, but the states I handle, which are southeast, we're not in the business of with that endorsement. So I have not gotten the day in day out of how that endorsement calculates out with, with an actual claim. But from what I do with my research of the endorsements I do see out there, they're doing a really good job of closing that gap. I have not
Good.
seen anything between the endorsement, between the personal auto policy, the endorsement, and then the coverage that you're going to have with the TNC. There's not anything huge. I think more so for an agent, you just want to make sure that you have got, you know, the limits, pretty much the endorsement limits are matching your PAP limits. Cause I think, as you know, even though that you may have your app on and no one in the car with you yet, the TNC will provide some coverage. A lot of that
Mhm.
is not, you don't get physical damage coverage for that, but you've got lower limits. States make sure it's at least to meet the financial responsibility of that state. I think the states have done a really good job of stepping in to make sure that if you're going to be a TNC in their state, that they are that you've got certain requirements. I think they're doing great at that to protect the consumer and
I
the
know I've
people of
seen
that
some
state.
states actually add legislation that if you're going to do TNC, it's required for you to tell
Yes,
your insurance
yes.
company. And then the insurance companies are doing a really good job at making sure that their clients aren't just minimally covered, because some of these companies are actually saying if you're going to add this endorsement, they come with some stipulations. You can only have one car on the policy that does this because
Hmm.
we really don't want to be insuring an entire fleet, right?
Right. Oh,
But
absolutely.
then
Yeah.
right, but then you have to have a minimum liability of X, 50, 150, whatever it is, in
Sure.
order for you to carry this endorsement. So if it was somebody, and I can see that happening, especially right now when times are a little iffy, budgets are running low, somebody calls their insurance agent, I want state minimum limits. And, hopefully that agent says no
Right.
very firmly, but, they're going to run out the door and they're going to do it anyways. But somebody who has state minimum limits, if they're going to be taking on this risk, some of those insurance companies are going, well, great, but state minimum limits aren't going to fit this endorsement. You need to have a little
Right.
bit higher coverage than that. Which
Yeah,
still it's
exactly.
not very much, in my opinion, as an insurance advisor. If you're going to be taking on such a risk like this, you need to have the most coverage you can have, not just
Uh,
whatever somebody says is the minimum limit for it.
Absolutely, especially when you have people you don't know in and out of your vehicle all day long. That's the scary part about it. And that's one of the things that I think is human is people ourselves who are using the service or those that work for the service and just insurance professionals. You don't know who is going in and out of that car every day and what kind of actions. I mean, you remember I was telling you the story. You imagine being the Uber driver and you got seven college girls, going out for the night or coming home from the night,
Right? I don't think you can
and
do
all the
that anymore.
distractions. Yeah, and all the distractions that go along with that, for goodness sake. That's these are things to be concerned about, most definitely, and that's what makes my heart pound a little, a little faster every time I start thinking about it. I'm like, oh my goodness, but it's and then you've got your companies like Uber Eats and DoorDash and so forth, and they're the gap between the personal auto policy and what they offer is even wider. Like
Right.
if you unless you actually have that food in the car with some of these TNCs, unless that food or whatever it is that you're picking up is in your car, you have no coverage whatsoever with your TNC, and you don't have it with your personal auto policy because your app is turned on and you're supposedly working. And we had a claim like that, and I'm gonna tell you, with a company who is not writing that TNC endorsement, to add on to the PAP, there's just some hard conversations to have with people.
Yeah.
This guy was driving with DoorDash and got into an accident, and he was at fault. And there was a third party that was also involved in this. His app was on. He had just turned his app on. Maybe 2 minutes later, gets into
Oh my
a
gosh.
car wreck, and now we're dealing with his vehicle's totaled, someone else's vehicle is totaled, and there's an injury, and he has no coverage for that.
Oh my gosh, all
I mean,
because your
and
app
that's
is turned on. Holy cap. If
yeah,
there is any one piece of advice, I guess, that you could tell your client about when you don't have coverage, it's dude, do not turn that app on until
yeah,
you are ready.
yeah. Yeah, well, and the thing was, he was ready. He was ready to go. They just hadn't hired him for anything. But our definition, and you made a great point earlier, Dustin, too. That it's all up for litigation. Who knows how the courts are going to come into this one day when you run into these situations, but and how all that's going to be interpreted. But the way we are interpreting it right now is that you've turned that app on and you said, "Hey, I'm here for work." Just because someone hasn't given you the business, or even so, if you're with you're with one of these that don't give coverage when the app is on. So for my research that I've seen with DoorDash, so your app is on, you've been called to go pick something up, you're driving to go get it picked up, you still do not have coverage until that food is in the car and you're on the
Oh
way to
my
the customer's house.
gosh.
That's a
Wow.
huge gap, and
That
and no one
is.
thinks about that. Yeah,
Because you
that's
got well, at
that's
that point, you have to have the app on in order to even accept
right,
the request. And
right.
I don't know how those apps work, but could you turn the app off at that point? Just saying. And then I'm
Yeah,
still really curious, how does an insurance company know, you know, I mean, because I'm just saying human nature, if you know where
you're
these
right.
gaps exist,
Right.
hey, claims adjuster, hey, Mr. Insured, do you work for Uber Eats? Yes, I do. Did you
Yeah.
have your app turned on? Nope. Sure didn't.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. And you're usually not going to, I mean, in our world of environment, we'd love to be able to think that we would have all the time to contact Uber Eats or Lyft or DoorDash or something, say, hey, can you just send us their log for the day? Who really? And I don't know, to be honest with you, how accessible that information is when
Right.
you are just
Well,
curious.
definitely don't ask an insured to show you their phone. You want to get personal with somebody.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Ask to see their phone and see how quickly they get upset.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So there's just the whole thing out there, and when I was in Nashville, I was there visiting the sick friends. We couldn't go out, obviously, and do things like that. So we were door dashing just about every meal that was coming in there, and they had never, the people I were visiting, they'd never used DoorDash. So I was kind of teaching them how to do that and how it would just be easier for them to get meals in the house without having to depend on other people. And then I start going into, they were insurance people too. So I start going into the whole insurance thing with them and they're like, oh my gosh. And
I
I'm like, yeah,
know. I
like,
just
yeah,
had a thought as we were talking about that. You've got your apps now where insurance company can add discounts, the driver discounts. And so that,
hmm
it tracks your GPS, your hard stops, your nighttime
right.
driving, all that stuff to try and get, a better discount for being a good driver. As this stuff kind of evolves, I have to wonder if you add this endorsement, if a insurance company will ever be like, okay, well, if you're going to drive, we're going to need you to also install this app so we can track your use of the
Mm,
TNC app. I mean, I'm
yeah.
not saying that that's out there at all, but that just popped into my head. If we've already got the platforms, the technology, the insure tech, if you will, if we've already got the platforms for already tracking where an insured even goes to decide whether or
Yeah.
not they qualify for a discount. I mean, it's
Right.
not that far of a stretch to be like, well, we're also going to add an app for tracking your use of your Uber app.
Exactly, and a good point with that is that I think as time goes on and more things get to the court systems and become litigated, and we start seeing court cases and court decisions that are kind of guiding all of that, and the monetary value that ends up being on maybe some of those court decisions, it may be that companies are forced to do something like that so they can better understand what their exposure and what the risk is for insuring someone
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you could have specialty companies that'll come out and, who knows where this thing will go. Imagine the next 5 or 10 years if we're having this conversation. We're like, you remember back in 2020 we were talking about this? Oh my goodness,
Oh my gosh, that's how I feel
We're
right now. Do you remember 5 years ago when this stuff, like, actually it started 10 years ago, but when it first came in
yeah,
and you're like, that's never gonna catch on. Nobody's gonna do that. Insurance will
yeah,
never respond. And now we're sitting here like, so that caught on quickly.
yeah. And then now we have the whole car sharing thing, which just kills me.
Oh
Absolutely.
my gosh.
Like that makes my heart like just come out of my chest, like you
I
have
mean, if
flat.
we're gonna share our homes, why not share our cars?
Right, right. But like, I was looking at one the other day. So, I was on a trip. I went, to Austin for a few days and then I went over to Nashville. So my car was parked for a little over a week, at the parking lot. Well, now you have this a company, it's called Flight Car, to where instead of having your vehicle just parked and you have to pay storage the entire time it's at an airport, people can come and take your car for a day or two or a
No.
few
Oh
hours.
wow.
And the big thing is you're doing this, you're getting paid while it's doing it, and then they will take the car before you come back home, to the airport before you fly in to come get your vehicle. They'll have your car detailed and waiting for you when you get back.
Oh wow. Wow, that's
You
interesting.
know,
I hadn't heard
like
of that one yet.
yeah. So things like that, I'm just like, oh my goodness, why is that? Or your car's parked like you're in New York City, and like you said, you're instead of having to pay the whole time for it to be in a garage, now people are in the city, then come rent your vehicle for a few hours, and and those things, from what I have seen, you have to be like a member of that. So, like Uber and Lyft, anybody who has the app pretty much in a credit card can get on, but you do have to be like a qualified member to be able to be part of the car sharing with
Wow.
some of the car sharing companies that are out there. But still, you don't know, and you have to leave your keys in the car. So you get your keys
Right.
in the car. Yeah,
I'm sorry, but
whether
my
you're you
car is a
whether
lot
it's
like my car is a lot like my cell phone. It's got a lot of my stuff in it that I don't want
right,
anybody touching or looking at. Oh my gosh. Well, that's an interesting one for sure. And I know insurance hasn't really caught up with endorsements that go to sharing your vehicle yet. We've caught up with exclusions for it,
right,
but it's nowhere near close as to what the endorsements are for transportation networks out there right now. But I'm sure it's coming, and
yeah,
it'll get there eventually. Oh, Nikki, this has been such a fun conversation. I love hearing about claims because, like I said, it's just one of those worlds that, as a CSR or a servicing agent, a account manager, a producer, we know about claims and we know how they turn out and we know how the coverage is going to apply. But you kind of shut your mouth when somebody calls and says, "I've got a claim," because you don't want to get caught in that E&O, and you sit back and you wait and see how it turns out. So I imagine you started by saying that claims is like super fun. And then it can also be really draining as well. And I imagine you guys have some serious fun in the claims department. So this has been a really fun conversation. I think we need to have some more conversations about claims because I bet you have some doozies.
Yeah, I feel like I could talk to you for like the next 3 hours or so more, but I don't know if anybody wants to sit around and listen to us talk for 3 hours.
I don't think so, but we can break it up into several series. So, Nikki, any other parting nuggets of information or just I'm done with this. See you later.
Yeah, no, the only thing I'll just reiterate real quick is that, especially on the agent side, just the claims department depends on you guys to be our eyes and ears and to know your clients. And so we really depend on you guys to know who's driving, in these TNCs and not, to really asking those questions. If you're a claims professional, listen to this, just understand that, those questions need to be asked in any kind of accident that's going on, especially with the personal auto policy. You never know who's driving for these TNCs, who's borrowing, sitting their car out to be borrowed or driving or any of that stuff. So just understand that it's out there and it is changing our world.
Like on an hourly basis.
Right.
Not,
Right.
not even daily at this point. So that is great words of wisdom. I back that up wholeheartedly. If there's any soapbox that I've ever stood on, it's that the agent needs to really understand their client personally on so many different levels in so many different ways in order to really understand and make sure that their client is accurately covered. And if they can't cover it, then they at least know their gaps in coverage so that they can mitigate that risk themselves. Thank you so much for being on this podcast with me today. I have truly enjoyed our conversation. I've loved that we have laughed the entire way. I hope we get to do this again about something else, or we could just keep on talking about TNC coverage.
There's a lot of crazy things out there in the world that we could talk about, I'm sure.
I know for sure. All right. Thank you so much, April. I'm sorry, Nikki. I'll get it eventually.
It's fine. It's absolutely fine. So, but no, thanks for having me. I truly appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. Thanks for hanging around and listening to another awkward conversation in insurance. Stay tuned for new episodes from Awkward Insurance wherever you listen to your podcasts. And be sure to check out the National Alliance on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or at scic.com. Now go forth and be awkward. Toodles!